Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call this hearing to order. Welcome to an informational hearing for the Senate Committee on Energy, Utilities, and Communications, focusing on the Public Interest Energy Research Program, and consider this a sunset review. It's a program administered by the California Energy Commission. We do have representatives of the Commission to present today and begin to field a series of questions. Just by way of background and context, what triggers the idea for the hearing is recognition that the public goods charge, which funds the PEER program, as it's more commonly referred to, on January 1st, 2012. And so as we're near the end of the 2010 legislative year, we have between now and then the 2011 legislative year, where undoubtedly the legislature will entertain whether or not to renew or extend the program, and if it does, if it will continue the program as is, or will continue the program in any sort of modified version. But before we begin to answer those questions, it's warranted to take a look at how the program has functioned to date and whether or not it has met its purposes and the intent that it was set out to achieve. The program, the public goods charge itself, was established in 1996 as part of AB 1890, authored by Senator Brulte at the time, which most people recognize was the bill that led California into a deregulated electricity market stage. As part of that bill, there was a concern that the investor-owned utilities would not invest as much as they historically had invested into technologies and programs in the areas of alternative fuels, alternative electricity sources, energy efficiency, and the like. And it was incumbent upon the state to ensure that if the private investment in research, deployment, development, and demonstration wasn't going to be there, that we develop alternative mechanisms to ensuring that the research would continue. We won't go into this. I won't go into specifics at this time as to the specific criteria and considerations for that research and the administration of the research program was, but we do highlight a couple of elements. One, that the Energy Commission ought to give preference to California-based entities in making awards, issues of intellectual property and benefits to Californians and California taxpayers are part of it. Today's conversation isn't the first time this conversation has taken place in recent years. The Assembly Utilities and Commerce Committee has had a similar conversation. This was in 2008. In 2004 and 2005, the California Council on Science and Technology sort of took a look at how the PEER program was going, and specifically taking a look at some of the grant awards and whether we were seeing the results of PEER-funded research that we hoped to see. So with that as the context, let me call forward both Commissioner Byron, from the California Energy Commission, CEC. There's the counterpart you have at the PUC, as well as Tom Kelly, the Deputy Director of Research and Development Division for the Energy Commission, and Melissa Jones, Executive Director of the California Energy Commission, with an opening presentation sort of giving the go ahead and come forward. Sort of the overview of the PEER program, and then we, as a committee, will begin to follow with some more specific questions after that. So, Senator DeSonia, if you have some opening comments, feel free. Otherwise, let's get rocking and rolling.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Senator. I'm Jeff Byron, Commissioner, California Energy Commission. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to make some introductory remarks this morning about the PEER program. And with your indulgence, I'd then like to ask Melissa Jones, my Executive Director, to set the stage for today's hearing by providing a brief overview of the basic facts and mechanics of the PEER program for the discussion that you'd like to follow. Also joining us is Dr. Tom Kelly. He's the Deputy Director of, maybe I have that wrong, the Director of the RD&D Division, and he's here also to help answer questions that you've got. I'd like to begin by complimenting the legislature on its visionary approach to establishing PEER 10 years ago. You know, PEER includes electricity funding for about $62.5 million a year, but many people don't know that it also includes about $24 million for natural gas public interest energy research that comes from the Public Utilities Commission. They have us conduct that research for them. In addition to that vision, the legislature has also redirected the program over the years and provides essential oversight and corrections. It's a valued role and it's extremely necessary. I welcome that oversight, and I also welcome the improvements that you've brought through changes in legislation. If I may, just briefly, my entire career has been energy. And in fact, it includes a 10-year stint at the Electric Power Research Institute in Palo Alto, which is the research arm of the investor-owned utilities in this country. They spend, well, I haven't checked in for a while, but about $300 million a year in doing research on behalf of the investor-owned utilities. But I also come with a customer perspective, having worked as the energy director for Oracle Corporation for about 4 or 5 years. So I have a good sense, I believe, of how research is conducted and also how it can be used by end-use customers. But here I'm today giving you my perspective as a commissioner, but also as the chair of the RD&D committee at the commission. I have to say I did not start at the commission being a great fan or supporter of PEER. But I have since come to the conclusion that it is a very well-run program, but more importantly, it's an excellent investment in California, and that's what I'd like to just take a few minutes to address. PEER inextricably links the state's energy policy and its leadership with the direction we head in California. This is unique. Most R&D is run by private corporations and research institutions. But PEER supports California's energy policies. And you know what these are. You've enacted laws that have directed us in terms of climate change and standards for buildings and appliances and renewable portfolio standards as well. There is significant value in public interest energy research because the funding benefits the public, not the shareholders. It creates jobs, although that's better done by the private sector. And it also generates technologies, which I believe does a much better job in California of creating jobs. And it also advances technologies that the private sector cannot or will not fund. The private sector won't invest in research if there's no financial or regulatory incentive to do so. But once it's established, or once it's substantiated through research, regulatory initiatives can be enacted, and the private sector will then step in. And there's numerous examples of that as well. I think you know California's cutting-edge energy policies find their foundation in PEER. Smart grids, renewables, most of all, energy efficiency. There's only two other states that have any program like this, and none of them compare to California. We also leverage the funds that you give us in a substantial way and the resources. PEER is a nationally renowned program that attracts hundreds of millions of dollars from public and private sources. Two key facts. For every dollar that PEER spends, we leverage an additional $1.64. In fact, in the last 18 months, we have leveraged about $22.6 million of PEER funding as co-funding towards over $530 million of ARRA funds, American Recovery Reinvestment Act. And PEER research is not conducted in a vacuum. We integrate and coordinate our research and development with other entities and other regions outside California. We work with the state agencies, CARB, the UC system, the PUC, investors, and corporations. We solicit the best research in the world, but we give a preference to California companies. And PEER staff is also becoming recognized as experts who are sought after at conferences, on advisory boards, and research collaborations. I believe that PEER is an investment in California of unparalleled proportions. The building and appliance standards fostered by PEER have saved the state on an ongoing basis over $1 billion a year. The PEER Energy Innovation Small Grant Program, which you may be familiar with, these are the $95,000 grants and below, have a 14-to-1 follow-on funding ratio. They've attracted over $300 million thus far. And I have some examples of that, but I'm going to be brief. The economic benefits estimated for PEER are 1.3 to 3.4 times the program cost, according to an independent assessment that was done by KEMA on 33 PEER commercialized products. The main point I'd like to make is that California needs to ramp up its R&D investment in the clean technology sector. If I could, I'm just going to cite a couple of key references. There was a recent National Science Board study that showed energy R&D is minuscule compared to a lot of other industries. We spend about 0.3% of net sales on energy R&D in this country. That compares to about almost 19% for pharmaceutical. That's 60 times as much. 7.9% on computers and electronics. That's 28 times as much as we spend on on energy. You may be familiar with the American Energy Innovation Council. This is some of the countries and the world's biggest business leaders, including Bill Gates and Jeff Immelt and John Doerr. They put out a business plan in June that has a couple of recommendations that I would like to just bring to your attention. They recommend that we grow the national investment to $16 billion annually in energy research and development. This is a lot like what you're doing with PEER. They recommend that we create centers of excellence throughout the country. This is a lot like what PEER is doing, such as the California Lighting Technology Center. They also recommend that we spend $1 billion a year on fundamental research. They call it ARPA-E. This is a lot like the Energy Innovation Small Grant Program. They also recommend that we can develop an independent national energy strategy board. This is a lot like the Integrated Energy Policy Report that this state's been developing every year for the last 10 years. One more, if you'll allow me. Pew Charitable Trust just put out a study. It's called Who's Winning the California Energy Race? It just came out last month. And they concluded that relative to size of the United States economy, clean energy finance and investments lag behind the G20 countries. Spain invests 5 times more than the United States did last year in clean energy. China, Brazil, and the UK 3 times more. Quote, nations seeking to compete effectively for clean energy jobs and manufacturing would do well to evaluate the array of policy mechanisms that can be employed to stimulate clean energy investment. I believe PEER does that really well. 2 conclusions. Energy innovation is key to meeting California's future energy needs, and I believe strongly it's the growth engine of our state's economy. PEER is an effective and essential catalyst for that growth. Now, I'm committed to, in my remaining months at the Energy Commission, to work with you to enhance the legacy that was begun by our legislature a decade ago and to continue to make the PEER program and job and technology engine it's become the envy of all of the other states. If you have a few more minutes, I'd like to ask if my executive director could just give us a briefing on PEER as well.
Good morning, Chairman and members. A lot of the background, I'm going to do this very briefly and cut to the chase. The second slide talks about what is PEER. You've already done an introduction noting that it was initiated when restructuring occurred, that it's to fill in gaps for public research that won't be done by the private sector. I'd also like to point out that the number 62.5 for funding was derived from the 135 that have been spent by California's IOUs, which at the time was about $135 million. So that's what gave us the money for PEER. On the next slide, you've also talked about the legislation that affects us. On the right side of the slide, we've listed the major pieces of legislation that provide us policy guidance and, in some cases, direct guidance for PEER. And on the left side, we have a bar chart here that shows cumulative expenditures in the different areas, different program areas for PEER. As you can see, energy efficiency and demand response are the highest investments we make. This coincides with the loading order, which has energy efficiency first, renewables second. You'll see it's 20%, advanced generation, transmission and distribution, and we also do spend money on transportation as the statute for PEER was amended. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the things that have resulted from PEER. First of all, we've got the building and appliance standards, and there are many different research projects that feed directly into the development of these standards. The standards save us over $1 billion per year. In addition, another example of a successful use of PEER research is the floor cooling technology that was developed by Walmart under a PEER grant. They're now installing that cooling technology in all their stores that are in dry climates, and state-owned buildings are also looking at including this in new dry climates as well. In the area of solar PV technology, we've increased reliability, lowered capital costs, and increased energy production. We have several companies that are now make the panels and the systems commercially available. They at one point received PEER dollars. Some of the other things we do in terms of reliability, we've worked with the ISO. We have a real-time grid software that we developed with PEER. It's now being used by the Independent System Operator, by Bonneville Power Administration, and by the Tennessee Valley Authority, as well as Eastern Utilities. It increases reliability, it prevents blackouts, and helps with renewable integration. Finally, we have done work in the area of renewables, avian protection. We did research there that's helped to reduce bird fatalities and also to help with preventing electrical disturbances. The next slide, when we were talking to staff, they wanted us to drill down a little bit. You'll have this presentation and you can ask any questions. These are the major research areas that fed directly into our standards and the amounts of money saved. If you'd like me to go through them, I can, or we can wait until later. Great. Okay. I'd like to highlight one of our more successful programs, which is the Small Grant Program. We've devoted about 95,000 of funds, and we leverage a 14:1 ratio with this. This funding is usually the proof of concept kind of work that new researchers and new products need to go through before they can really enter into the research and development and towards commercialization. We think it's one of the best investments of our scarce dollars. We have a very good track record with companies being able to attract venture capital and other investments to bring these products or services into the market. One example anyway is the Primus, which is a battery technology company. It's the only one in California. Most of the batteries are developed in China, and they now have battery storage to install with 25 megawatt wind grid storage systems. And as you can see, there are jobs associated with it. The $1 million PEER award leveraged $13 million in ARA money and an additional $4 million in venture capital. In terms of how PEER sets its priorities, first and foremost, PEER invests according to the California statutes and energy policy guidance. Almost always, PEER projects have to provide match fund. This, will vary depending on the type of project. And as Commissioner Byron said, we used $22.6 million to leverage $534 in ARA funds this year, plus $481 of private money. Just moving on to peer funding, the staff asked us questions about the process we use real briefly. We use our advisory board to provide strategic peer program advice. The CE staff seeks input from a variety of people, including industries, utilities, universities, many other institutions. The Energy Commission's Research and Development Committee then develops a budget and makes decisions for the final program. Solicitations are prepared, they're released, staff evaluates them, they then go back to the R&D committee for approval, and then go to the full commission. And Commissioner Byron did state the main conclusions. The one thing I'd like to add is that as we sit here today, none of us knows for sure what fuels or what technologies will be predominant in the next 5, 10, 20 years. PEER can help separate the wheat from the chaff, and as we transform into a clean energy landscape. And so we believe that this program is really essential to creating a clean economy and developing clean, green jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything, or are you here to answer all our tough questions?
Your choice.
Well, feel free. We're still setting the stage here.
No, this is wonderful.
We brought him for the tough questions, Senator.
Tough questions. All right. Well, let's kind of break it down and start from the beginning here. If we go back to language in the AB 1890 back in 1996, again, I think we both acknowledged some of the original rationale for the PEER program, which, by the way, represents about 18% of public goods charge funding. So not the vast majority by any stretch, but a solid percentage. It was in part established out of a concern that the IOUs, or the private sector in general, wouldn't invest in as much of the research as it would pre-deregulation. It's been almost 15 years since 1996. Is that still the case, or has that proven to be the case? Can you comment on what we've seen on the private side commitment to basic R&D and D?
After the AB 1890, the utility spending on its own R&D, absent the public purpose part that the public goods charge is covering, plummeted quite a bit. And today it has not reached the levels that we saw prior to that. So if you add all the peer public interest research plus the private or utility interest research that they pursue, we're still less than just before restructuring.
And we get those figures how?
I can get those for you. I don't keep them in the top of my head. But,
but
sure.
Is it independent sources, or is that information you get directly from utilities?
We get it directly from utilities. We participate with utilities in reviewing their research and development plans to make sure the things they are doing are not what we're doing, and that in fact, we participate with the utilities when the PUC is considering what kind of funding to approve for their own research. We participate with them and give our recommendations to the PUC. So we're aware of how much it is in each case. The utilities typically do their general rate cases once every 3 years, so it's one IOU per year, and so we participate with them each time. We know what the next 3 years of funding will be for them when the PUC decides it.
Not just amounts, but specific areas of research.
Yeah, the specific project areas, yes.
So, a long way of saying we're trying to not be duplicative.
Exactly. And try to be complementary.
Even better answer.
Senator, if I may, I was at EPRI when AB 1890 passed, and the shudders were felt throughout the organization and the impact that had. I don't have the specific numbers either, but we know that investor-owned spending is down. We work very closely with the utilities. In fact, I chair we call it the Transmission Advisory Committee with the utilities and the ISO, but really more it's the Smart Grid Advisory Committee these days. So we work closely with them on a lot of things. They are applying more funding, and we support their funding in their general rate cases. We generally write letters to the PUC and support that because we're after seeing them spend more, not less, obviously. But like I said earlier,
so that's an IOU specific answer? Do we have additional or supplemental information from other private sector sources? And then same question as it pertains to other government, mainly the federal government. That seems to be the big bulk of public sector investment.
Right. There were a couple of studies that were done about 3 or 4 years ago. They looked at overall spending in the United States, not California specific. And so we try to track but aren't aware of all the research and development. Many companies try to keep that private since it benefits their shareholders and their interest. But we try to track that pretty carefully.
We also have participation by our staff in DOE and other investment plans when they're trying to figure out what to spend their money on and how to do it. They invite us, or we're already members of these national committees, and we try to advise them in what we've done and what they can do to help and not duplicate.
Okay. And the only reason I ask about other private sector entities is, let's take a contemporary example. This conversation about electric vehicle charging stations. There's charging station companies out there, if you will, that are, I got to believe, investing in some of the technology that's going to make them more competitive or better performing than their competition. Where's their money coming from? Some of it's coming from public sources, but some of it's coming from private sources. That's not a utility, but that's one example of another potential private sector commitment to research and technologies that fall very well into this category of what PEER was supposed to fill if there was a void. If the IOUs aren't stepping up completely to fill that void, are there others that we should factor in?
Well, actually, because we do require match funding for all of our peer investments, the private company has to come up with a match fund. They're also able to take advantage of utility rebates and other incentive programs. So we are leveraging private money out there.
Yeah, but and not to sort of get too much into the weeds here, but I've seen more than a handful of instances where that leverage comes from, their other utility grants or another federal grant, and if it's the same dollars, just in a different form, is it really net new dollars? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
We will typically, in our solicitations, require that the match funding not be from other government sources, so we be sure we're not double counting.
Okay. And let's talk about the federal government for a minute. I know maybe up until 2008, let's say. I don't know what happened at the federal level in 2008, but the level of commitment to research from a dollar perspective in these areas was what it was. I think that's part of the responses to our questions from the June letter that's in the materials. But in the last couple of years, there's been a tremendous resurgence in federal commitment to research across the board in alternative energies, energy efficiency, et cetera. Specifically, how does that change our numbers?
There's no doubt about it. It's great to have a Secretary of Energy that's science-based. We've seen enormous influx of funds out of this administration into smart grid energy research, and we've benefited from that. I've gone back to D.C. with PUC commissioners to make sure that California can grab as much of that as we can. And I think we've done pretty well. You've probably seen the numbers and are more familiar with the ARA funding that's come into the state. And it's not all ARA funding. There's also direct funding from DOE. And we've helped to leverage some of our peer funds and attracting those big dollars. That's how we got up to, I believe, I forget the number now, but the over $500 million of fund, ARA and DOE funding. I read the quarterly reports that the VC community puts out on energy research funding, and it's a little depressed right now. There's not a whole lot of private sector funding that is going into the companies. We try and leverage as much of that as we can, but we don't see it all either, Senator. We don't know. I meet with them. I meet with the VCs. I meet with a lot of the technology companies in Silicon Valley and what they're developing. A lot of that work is based upon fundamental research we do at PEER.
So the stats that I know the governor likes to brag about, whether it's 50% or 60% of the national venture capital in the clean tech sector is coming to California. Is that a result of that much more money being infused to California, or the drop-off everywhere else?
don't know.
Okay. The other thing that I couldn't help but think about in preparation for the hearing, sort of an offshoot of, would the research money be there elsewhere or otherwise, but if it wasn't for PEER, and maybe by who? In the last, 5 years or so, there's clearly been a tremendous increase in general public awareness and concern about climate change, and therefore the need to invest in alternative sources of energy, energy efficiency, for a variety of reasons and in a variety of ways. Between public policies, not just in California, but increasingly throughout the nation, whether it's setting renewable energy mandates, for example, or higher fuel efficiency standards in our automobiles, what has that done to the private sector to incent commitments in research, fundamental research? Have we not put in place, through both public and commercial mechanisms, the incentive for the private sector to invest on their own?
I think it depends by the technology you're talking about or the product. The closer you are to commercialization, the more expensive it becomes. And that's what we call the valley of death.
Can you repeat that again? The closer to
commercialization a product or service becomes, the more expensive it is to do the development work at that stage. And so many companies are risk averse, especially in this environment. And one of the ways that you encourage them to get through that, what we call valley of death, is by supplementing with federal dollars are used a lot for development and deployment. Our research is a little farther back in the research realm. So,
if I may, the way I see it, Senator, and I could be wrong, PEER really supports a lot of fundamental policy that the state has implemented over the last 10 or 12 years. We support the appliance and building appliance and building standard work with our research at PEER. That leads to regulations that then the industry responds to with new technologies. Likewise, energy efficiency, renewables, the smart grid, the legislation that you passed recently requiring the PUC working with us to develop a smart metering definition and plans from these regulations and laws tend to be supported by the research that we do, and the private industry responds. And I think you've seen that. Having been with you at that smart meter demonstration that was taking place a couple of weeks ago, you can see that the Intels and the Googles and the other companies are responding substantially, and I think it's driven primarily by the laws and regulations.
No, look, I don't necessarily disagree. If we go back not just to 1996 when the public goods charge was established, but even further back to the 70s and the last biggest energy crisis in America, California has clearly been on the forefront, both from primarily from a policy standpoint, but not only from a policy standpoint. The question is, from the 70s through the 80s and the 90s to 2010, from a national, if not global perspective, I don't believe California is alone now in terms of its awareness, its commitment to whether it's renewable energy, alternative energy sources, efficiency standards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Coming back to this question of the need for the public goods charge and the PEER program specifically for today's conversation, are the conditions the same that sort of put the urgency and the need for PEER as it was in 1996? Are we talking the same today? Or if not, what's different, for better or for worse?
Conditions have changed. You're absolutely right. However, I think we should be investing more rather than looking at investing less or none in this sector. This is the growth engine for California's economic recovery.
Good. I'd like to take a partial shot at the answer. It's clear that a lot of the policies that have been put in place environmental policy, energy policy, a lot of those interact. And the adopters, the people who are going to have to actually do this and achieve it, typically, as Melissa pointed out, are risk averse, and they want to get something off the shelf that they can use. What is it that I can use to do this the best way I can right now? Their interest is not to spend a lot of money on R&D. It's to get compliance going. And so there's a big gap between what there is on the shelf today and what we'll need in the future to make it happen. And that's where the PEER program focuses, is on that R&D for the next wave. I'll say, for example, if we, it's like cell phones. I'll bet my cell phone will not charge on your charger because you don't have standards for how that will work. In the energy industry, when we're trying to integrate all these different pieces, we need those kind of standards. Nobody has it, and it's no in one person or entity, business, company, anything to get that done. It's R&D's job. What we do, we see it coming, we know it's coming, let's invest now so that when the need is there, it'll be there. That's the difference.
And I know you touched on it earlier, but can you expand for a minute or two on what else you do to try to minimize duplication in research that's being conducted by either other public or private sources? We
beat the bushes to try to get ideas and pieces that are bits and pieces are being worked on here and there. We try to engage as many different practitioners as we can. We involve other agencies. We involve utilities. We involve consulting firms. We use universities, not just UC, but all universities. We go to research labs. We try to find the best non-duplicative work. Where's the work needed? Where are the gaps between what we have today and where we need to be? We focus research on those and get wide input. We hold public hearings to try to, if we've missed something, let those ideas come forward. And as a result of that, then we go out and try to provide a solicitation to get whatever we might have missed that we don't know about. We target what we do know, and we try to get others. And on occasion, we're surprised, and there are new ideas come in we hadn't thought about. So we try to open it up as much as possible.
Okay. So in this sort of just opening area of questioning, I think, again, I'm trying to drill down to the very, very basics. When the public goods charge and PEER program specifically was established, it was under certain assumptions. And are those assumptions still true or not, from the void of other governmental or private sector research to avoiding duplication and focusing on the areas of research dictated in statute. So I'll certainly invite, under public comment today and even after today, input from others as we begin to contemplate potential legislation next year on the bigger question. I want to shift for a little bit on the actual mechanisms of how the money is collected, how the money's accounted for, before we even get into the expenditure side of the conversation. So specifically, walk me through how it happens. Utilities are the ones that collect the funds through ratepayers, through monthly bills, but at some point it's transferred to the state. Is there one account, multiple accounts? Walk me through that.
Okay, each quarter the utilities collect the money from the customers and send it to the Energy Commission, and it goes into a special PEER account, and it's its own separate little entity, separate from ERPA or any of the other accounts that we maintain.
Okay, and so there's no other sources of funds that come into this particular account?
That's correct.
There are some, essentially, but we have royalties that come in that don't come directly from the utilities. They come from the sales of some of the technologies that we've helped provide. Those don't come from the utilities, and I can't think of the moment of any other source of income for that.
Okay. Commissioner, you mentioned earlier a comparable sort of natural gas research program. I believe that was a result of a legislation by now Senator Wright, then Assemblymember Wright.
I'm going to defer to staff on that just to make sure we get the answers right. But yes, I understand that's $24 million a year.
So does that money go into this account, or is that a separate research account that's established?
We track it separately within that account. It's a sub-account within the peer account. The legislation says to treat that money through the peer process, the peer electric part of the process, and so we treat it through the same thing. We just keep a separate little book, a running total.
Okay, for accounting purposes, but as far as decisions on how to invest the money?
Oh, those are combined hand in glove. We offer reports to the PUC, and in our annual reports we refer on electricity that we provide, and to the PUC in every 6 months an accounting of where the money goes and how it ties with our electricity funds. And so each team that we have focuses on both electricity and natural gas research, so we don't duplicate things. It can be very wasteful. One example I like to use is if we're doing research on a building, it makes no sense to do electric research and then gas research, have different teams go in and do it at different times, the same people or different people. We try to combine those into one time to keep it efficient.
So the gas research fund, the fund completely separate and independent.
That's correct. And they're actually collected from the gas utilities by the PUC. And one of the reasons why the PUC wanted to place the money within PEER was so that we could integrate both the natural gas and electricity research.
So on a project or grant by grant basis, if you will, a certain percentage of that project cost is attributed to the gas account versus the electricity account?
That's exactly right. If we have a solicitation or a project that has joint, then it's divided by the jointness. Each one puts up a share. If it's mostly electricity, then most of the funding is electricity. If it's all gas, then the funding is all gas.
Okay. And talk a little bit more about how the grants or the projects or the studies synergize or synthesize. Can you give me a couple of examples?
Go ahead.
One example we have is a solicitation we did last year was very successful, and we're proposing to duplicate it in major part again this year or early next year. And that was our renewable energy secure communities. We call it RESCO. We've learned that a building by itself, for example, or a home by itself cannot necessarily find all of the renewable energy opportunities that any other building can. If it's behind a mountain or under a tree, it's not going to have as much solar, so it just doesn't have that effect, and we can't get that done as much. So we went to a community scale to try to say, okay, a whole system of houses or buildings, commercial buildings or educational buildings, any kind of homes, together can integrate a number of different solar opportunities, some here, some there, just depending on their location and resources they have available. So we went out with this solicitation to say, what can you come up with? What community size can you come up with that will yield a combination of things to get at least 3 different renewables to integrate together? Because we're also concerned about integration. We want more renewables, but it's not always clear to utilities, to our analysts, or to our researchers how the integration will take place and what all the problems are. How do we accommodate all of this new renewables that we all want? So we had a solicitation that came out with combinations of energy efficiency, some heating systems, some lighting systems, some solar systems, and together they come out with projects that we think are both electricity and natural gas savings, and so we try to identify those and pay for those accordingly.
Talk about the number of people that applied.
The number of people. I think we had 59 applicants. 29 passed, and we had enough funding for about 14. And we took those projects to the committee, and the committee said these are so good, we want to fund some more. And so we were able to find funds to put in there and augment that, and that's one of the reasons we think it's a good idea. We're going to try it again next time, not with as many renewables, but the same concept, because it was very successful.
Okay, and maybe this is a good segue for another area of questioning that I had. Clearly, there's a lot of interest and competition for the funds that are made available. for as much money as $62 million a year may sound like. At the end of the day, it is finite when you have this level of interest and number of applicants for limited funds. You need to be as thoughtful as possible on where we're going to get the best bang for the buck. Right? That's our job too as legislators. If we're going to argue for the extension or renewal of the program, we need to showcase to taxpayers that they're getting the best bang for their buck. And one of the first questions we always get on any state department, any state agency, any state program is, how much of it is actually going towards the intended purpose versus how much is getting stuck in overhead and administration. So can you begin to break down for me what the biggest areas of on the expenditure side are? How much is overhead, how much is the actual grants or maybe other costs in administering?
I can give you the short answer, which is all the $62.5 million goes directly to research projects. We're allowed to use a piece of the Pure Trust Fund to fund our staff and resources. Currently, it's at about 10% of 10% overhead for all our administrative and other costs.
So let me get this straight. I heard you say all of it goes to research,
right.
But no, we can lop off 10% for overhead.
And it's an interest-bearing account, so it accrues funds. We have a cap on how much we can spend each year, but it's authorized through the budget.
So $62.5 million goes towards research.
Yes.
And the 10% figure of that is 6.25. But the 6.25 doesn't come from the 62.5. It comes from the interest earned on.
Correct.
It comes from the interest. It comes from monies that are collected that are above 62.5. If it comes out to be collected above that, it's a collected on an energy use basis. So there's a little bit more, a little bit less collected. But we collect a total of about $70 million, 62.5 of which goes to all the projects that we're allowed, and 6.5 roughly to 6.25 goes to the overhead. Staff, pro rata.
I'd love to get a breakdown of what that, other beyond the 62.5 consists of. How much of it is interest earned? How much of it is, royalties? I mean, if you have an account anywhere that's accruing 10% on an annual basis, that's my new 401k.
We can get you the exact numbers.
Okay.
And I guess the one thing I would just add is Tom made the point about how the collection varies, and that's because it's a surcharge on each customer how much they use. That varies from month to month. That varies from year to year, depending on weather and a whole bunch of other conditions. So the 62.5 is
now,
the baseline.
and I imagine it fluctuates with the economy as well.
As well,
I mean,
yes.
energy consumption is way down. That's no secret to anybody. It's a reflection of the economy. So money's accruing to Pure. Public goods charge as a whole, but Pure specifically for the last 2 years has been down?
Been flat. It's been flat, not down.
They've met their obligations for funding the program.
Okay.
We don't have extra money coming in.
And has that administrative percentage changed over the years, or it's been sort of fixed around that 10 or at that 10 since the beginning?
It's been fixed around the 10, but in the early years, when we were ramping up the program, we probably devoted more resources in getting it started. So it's mainly startup costs that would...
And what are some of the more significant elements of that administrative chunk for the Energy Commission? That covers what?
Biggest element is staff salary and benefits.
Okay. I assume there's a breakdown of that somewhere that we can take a look at.
Yes.
We can provide that.
And can you just describe what's been done, not just in recent years, but over the years, even in great budget surplus times for the state of California, on what the Commission has done to try to keep those costs to a minimum and therefore maximize the amount that's actually dedicated to the research projects?
Do you want to?
It's, we only submit BCPs when there's a lot more work. All of these positions are funded through BCP, so we have to justify every position we add, and we try not to come to ask for more resources even in flush times, because if we can run the system and keep it going, we're okay. There were, in the early years, we had startup issues where we were both increasing the funding and increasing staff. And we have a unique, not completely unique, but it's interesting. We have 2 years to encumber funds. Most agencies have 1 year to encumber funds because it takes so long to get research going sometimes. It just takes 2 years to do it. And we have 4 years to expend those funds because research projects, it's not like buying a known telephone off the shelf. We can't get an iPhone immediately. It's develop an iPhone or whatever the technology happens to be. So we take 4 years to disperse all of that through contracts, up to 4 years, not all of 4 years long. So we have 6 years of growth, in essence, while we're putting new contracts through to the tune now of $62.5 million a year, and we're managing all of the other hundreds of millions of dollars where the projects are still in process. So as we built up to a steady state, we're at a state now that we can efficiently move through those monies without requiring additional resources. So if we need more, we would ask for it, but...
The other thing we do is we look regularly at how much staff how much we're spending on staff. We look at the amount that we use for contractors for support. We look at the overhead that's included in projects, try to lower that. So we try to do continuous improvements in the program.
Okay. And we'll get to that topic in a few minutes. Have you ever been in a situation or in a year where, you know what, the applications this year just weren't that impressive and we're not going to put out the $62.5 million. We're going to only issue 40. And what do we do with the 20? Do we save it for next year? Do we?
Not to my knowledge. We've typically turned down roughly $20 million a year in projects. So it's not like we don't have enough projects
that qualify.
To qualify. These pass our screening, and they pass the staff muster. They go to the commission, pass the commissioner's muster, and we just don't have the money for it.
So every single award, or since the inception of the program, meets the not just eligibility, but sort of urgency, potential significance test.
That's correct. I can't specify since before I got to the commission in this capacity, but from what I saw of it before then, what I've heard and seen since then of our procedures, that's true.
Because we're either vulnerable or not to, as many of the successes that you've already pointed out and will be pointing out throughout the course of today and future hearings, is there that one or two project out there like, what were they thinking? Was that really necessary? We're not going to be surprised by any of those situations. That's what I'm hearing.
We can't guarantee that we won't be surprised. Research is inherently risky, and so not all projects are successful. And what we try to do is we try to set up the funding so that if we see early on that it looks like it's not going to be a success, we stop the project and don't expend the funds.
No, I understand. Research isn't always successful, but at least you can stand by. But it seemed like a really good idea at the time.
Yes. Well, we have so many different eyes looking at it at so many different levels before it actually comes to a contract, and ultimately the 5 commissioners have to look at it and say, yeah, that passes muster. And
I know this is probably a long list of entities that have received awards over the years, but is there sort of a general breakdown on where the money tends to go? If I do my math correctly, 62.5 times, 18, 10. Or not 18
10.
years, but right, the time frame that it's been in place, and the percentage that of the public goods charge that Peer represents, we're looking at about $1 billion, roughly.
Well, in the early years, it was less than the 62.5, and it was considerably less than the very early years. And then for about 5 years, it was, again, less than that, but not by as much. And it's only been in the last few years that it's come up to 62.5. So, but
whatever the number is,
$600 million.
Okay, so whatever that number is, who are some some of the historic biggest recipients, if there's any that stand out.
Go ahead.
It's been probably, over half has been to companies through competition and sole sources, different entities that have applied. That's companies, that's individuals. Sometimes it's an individual who has a great idea but needs some help to get it started. That's over half. Probably, let's see, these are probably 30% has gone to universities, something like that, 25 to 30%, somewhere in that range. And
Do you have a summary of this?
and some 15% or so goes to national labs, something like that.
We can provide those.
We can get more detailed breakout. I hate to trust my memory.
Oh, I'm counting on it. The UC in particular, all its campuses, all its programs, UC specifically, my understanding is they're a pretty sizable recipient.
23%.
23% them alone. Okay.
The staff had asked that question, so we were able to research our database and find it.
Okay. So the 30% to universities as a category, so it's 23% UC roughly, leaving about 7 for sort of everybody else.
Roughly.
And are all those universities in-state, or is that across the country?
I believe that's all California. California State Universities, Stanford.
So Pure doesn't send money
USC.
to universities outside the state of California?
We do, but I think we categorize those in other government. It's not. It's just how we account for it.
And I'd like to point out that less than 10% of the money goes to out-of-state.
As you're probably aware, that was an area of inquiry
Yes.
earlier in the year for the
We've
state.
improved that. It used to be higher, but since we started giving preference to California utilities per legislative direction, the number has gone down to about 7-8%.
Okay, so 23% goes to the UC. Is there anybody else in any of the other categories that, as a whole, as part of a whole, get anywhere near the 23%? Any entity over the
National
10%?
labs.
I mentioned national labs, but so the private industries, I'm not.
Individuals and private companies. What's a typical overhead for the specific grants awarded? Do we set a minimum or a maximum, or?
We negotiate with the UC system a standard rate. It's about 12% right now for overhead. In earlier years, it was more expensive, so we've negotiated that down. We have an overhead that's negotiated with the national labs. And then depending on the particular contractor or private entity that comes in, part of it's based on their bid, the proposal that they put forward to us, but we do try to minimize the overhead.
Since we have a contracted or negotiated rate with the national labs,
Yes.
do you know what that rate is?
I think it's about 12 also.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it's about 12 also.
It's a standard rate, and DGS is renegotiating with UC. I don't know if they've recently completed a negotiation with the national lab for their terms and conditions, but they're still being developed.
Okay. Now, true or false, once upon a time it was upwards of maybe 30% with some of the entities. UC not excluded.
True.
So we had a point in time where between the 30 for them and the 10%, whether it was part of this pot or the other pot, taxpayers could arguably say, oh my God, 40% off the top, just for overhead.
We had some instances of that. We went in and renegotiated those. We've gotten those down. But if you look over the course, that is a true statement.
Should I mention private ones get 300% overhead? Okay.
No question for me?
No, not now. She answered it for me.
Okay. Let's talk a bit about the actual substance then of some of the grants. The general goal of the program, as I began to touch on at the beginning of the hearing, is to develop and help bring to market energy technologies that provide not just increased environmental benefits, but greater system reliability, lower system costs, and tangible benefits to electric utility customers through investments in a variety of areas: advanced transportation, energy efficiencies, advanced electricity generation technologies, even one that I was sort of surprised to be reminded of, reduce or eliminate consumption of water. And maybe we can talk a little bit about how that ties into this. And again, the statute goes on to read that to achieve these goals, the portfolio for the program should strive to achieve the following, balancing not just the environmental benefits, but the energy supply benefits, innovative technologies, enhanced transmission and distribution capabilities, on and on and on. So I guess for starters, my assumption is you firmly believe that PEER to date has lived up to all those requirements and standards.
Yes, we do.
Any commentary on, we'd give ourselves an A plus, or those rocky start at the outset. We didn't get A's from the beginning, but we've learned along the way.
We've learned along the way, but I think that it is true that we have followed the direction in the legislation that was passed regarding us, and we have followed the energy policy. One of the slides that I presented showed you the cumulative funding, and energy efficiency is the highest, then it goes to renewables, then it goes to advanced generation, transmission, and then transportation. So we believe that our portfolio does meet the statute.
And you mentioned, one of the first questions I had, and you've given me a statistic already, to the extent that the Energy Commission gives preference to California-based entities in making the award. So 90% plus of PEER funding specifically stays in California. Just go back to all the criteria that's outlined in statute. First, I know you've gotten sort of legislative direction since then through a series of bills, but going back to day one, how is that all woven into the process of whether it's drafting RFPs, evaluating applications and proposals, and ultimately awarding money? Just go into a little bit more detail on that. I think that's a good chart, by the way, of the categories of funding, the amounts, and the reference to the loading order. Mm-hmm. But let's drill down a little bit more into specifics of your day-to-day.
Okay.
We use the Integrated Energy Policy Report as the guidance for how we separate what's considered to be the most pressing energy policy issues today. In every policy report that the Commission provides, which is the process is presided over by two commissioners. The R&D committee is fortunate today also that the previous presiding member for the policy report is the chair of the R&D committee, so that helps keep our work focused on the top energy issues. In each one, we follow the guidance. In some cases, our specific R&D areas are called out. Do it particularly this way. In others, it's just general guidelines. We want to try to increase renewables, or we haven't done enough to achieve energy efficiency. So we take that guidance and whatever guidance we can get from the advisory boards towards the issues that we happen to be going for. And we'll develop a general plan that says, here are the areas that we most want to examine for possible funding. And with that, we try to get as many inputs in each one of those sectors as we can to build a case, a list of possibilities of the research that's available, where the gaps are needed, and from that we'll select the best projects that we can and the best programs we can to try to make those match. It's at that point that we say, all right, here's $300 million worth of things that we could be doing. Out of all of those, how do we come down to something that is respectable and useful, and most useful in our process? And it normally works out that because the guidance is that we need to achieve more energy efficiency for a host of reasons, good reasons, that the most of the money sort of winds up that way in projects that we come to, and we look at all of those options that we have across all the service areas, across all the guidance that you've listed there, and the different teams. We have different teams associated with each one to make sure that perspective, that policy perspective, gets a place at the table, at the research funding table, and then we provide those options to the RD&D committee, and they deliberate how that works with what they know about energy policy.
And how it balances out on an ongoing basis.
Yes.
With the criteria. Part of the criteria, again, speaks to ratepayer benefit. How do you define ratepayer benefit? How do you measure the benefits to ratepayers and California as a whole on a project, grant-by-grant basis, project-by-project basis, year-by-year basis?
I'll just say that it's pretty difficult for each individual project to project what the public interest benefit will be, what the cost benefit is, because we don't know whether the project's going to go forward, end up being commercialized, and end up in the market. That's where the true benefits come from.
But you have to outline at least a potential for that.
Yes.
At the front end. Okay.
Right. And what we do is we try to identify if it's an efficiency measure. We try to identify the energy savings, the cost reductions, and in addition, we calculate GHG reductions or other environmental benefits.
And if it's a project that looks like it's going to be a one-off, there's one unique application for it and nobody else is going to get it, that doesn't weigh too heavily in our minds. What we really care about most is, will this technology save a lot of energy, be more efficient, have fewer moving parts, do something that's really going to contribute to the process in which it would be used, and then will it save money, and how much money? And if you extrapolate this, what's the market for it? Are there 10,000 entities in the state that could adopt it, or is it 2,000? Is it 10? And the bigger the potential for savings, we like to give those priority over the ones that don't have as much ex-ante possibility up front.
Senator, I think it's really difficult to assess R&D savings and benefits. I think we've got some really good, solid numbers, studies, independent studies that have been done. They're very conservative, that show tremendous benefit. EPRI had this same problem as well. It's very difficult. In fact, I think it's even more challenging for us when we're doing research that supports our policy directions. You indicated water earlier. My commission took let's say it exercised its authority and determined that no fresh water was going to be used for power plant cooling anymore. But we needed to have the research that could support those kinds of directions and the technologies that would be needed on the part of developers to dry cooling and such to address that. So how do you value that? How do you show that we've taken we've used that research to take the right direction from a policy point of view? It's even more challenging, I think, at PEER to quantify those kinds of numbers.
So I know you're absolutely right. It's not cut and dry how we measure on the front end or even on the back end the benefits to ratepayers, but there's general categories. You promote them all the time: energy savings, cost savings. The need to build less power plants, all these different ways to measure. One of the more complicated ones, and sometimes more controversial ones, we've seen in other areas as well, is intellectual property. And when things do come to fruition, they do reach the market or pass the commercialization test. How does California and the PEER program share in that? Can you kind of give me the overview on that before I get into more specific questions?
As part of each contract, we have a standard condition that the recipient of the grant or the contract award provide a small percentage of the sales of technologies that get developed under the contract back to the Energy Commission. We don't always, in fact, we don't typically expect such payback, such royalties, because often the research we're asking for doesn't lead to a technology that is directly expected to be a sale. Sometimes if it's with a university, we just honor the universities because we're putting it in the public venue. We aim for getting more technologies out into the marketplace, more information out into the marketplace, and we believe that the more cost burden we place on these getting out there, the less likelihood it will be done. And so our process is set up that at the end of each contract, an assessment is made. Is this going to result in an intellectual property that will be leading to royalties that we would have to track or collect? And that determination is provided in each and every contract, and the ones that we believe have such payback will be tracked and monitored in the Commission.
And I think the other thing we have to do is we have to balance. We're asking people to put up matching funds. There's not a clear incentive in the market for them to do this. And so when we negotiate royalties in the contracts, we try to balance getting returns on successful projects with not placing too much of a burden that the project wouldn't go forward or the applicant wouldn't invest the money.
My understanding is under previous reviews of PEER, this was a specific issue that, among others, Department of Finance suggested there was a lot lacking. Were we tracking? Were we not tracking? How were we following up? Changes were suggested. I don't know who specifically at the Commission, whether it's at the Commission level or the staff level, commitments were made to improve the processes and procedures, and even incorporated into this manual that I've been hearing or reading about and still anticipating. So
that was with respect.
Let's go again back to the beginning here. Talk to me what it was like in the early days. How it's changed since that time.
I can talk to you about how we do it now. I was not here in the early day in this job in the early days of the program.
In terms of royalties, I think I haven't been with the program the whole time, but I think that the royalty provisions haven't changed much over time. What I was going to say was, in terms of the direction from finance or the suggestion from finance that we develop a comprehensive manual, that was directed more at the area of contracting and administrative oversight. On the royalty issue, they did recommend that we begin better tracking. We are trying to do that, but it's a really difficult thing to do because somebody starts with a research concept, they move it, some other company may buy that particular company. Oftentimes there's several sales of products that are in the different phases, and so it is difficult to track, and we recognize that, but we're looking for ways to do it better, and so far we haven't seen a silver bullet to help us with this.
And we in our draft DISC manual that you referred to, we have our royalty assessment process outlined in the on page 479 that we shared with staff, and I have here if you.
No, let me ask a couple specific questions. We go back to the June 2010 response to the letter from the original date that we had scheduled this hearing, where on this specific issue, when asked, I believe that the response, and this is in your response to me, in response to the audit, the Commission is creating a comprehensive compilation of policies and procedures for peer contract managers to follow. How to track and deal with intellectual property benefits is one of the many issues that these policies and procedures will address. So I think there's a recognition of a need for improvement, and we're going to get to it, is how I read that. However, in the supplemental materials, on page 251, Appendix F, we read that the spreadsheet describes PEER's royalties policies as boilerplate and notes, quote, need to expand current documentation that is currently placeholder for the PEER manual. So again, where are we in the evolution of
We have a draft
the
manual out.
policies? Yeah.
Yeah, we have a draft manual out now. It will be finalized.
And for the record, when was it due? How long have we been working on this? When was the manual called for or first promised?
We got the results from Department of Finance January 2009. So we then moved forward with it. We had to get some specific assistance from outside agencies and others to be able to put this all together. And so I think we had committed within about a year. And we're lagging a little bit behind.
Not to complicate. I'm trying not to be a moving target, but maybe by asking different or simpler questions, I can try to simplify it in my mind. Do we have a number of how much the Energy Commission has collected over the life of the PEER program in royalty payments?
Yes, we do.
And that figure is?
Approximately $4.8 million.
Okay. And give yourself a grade. Over the life of the program, and I know it precedes, your and your time at the commission. Have we done an A+ job of collecting those royalty payments? How would you measure yourself on how well we've done in this category?
I guess I'd say we've done the best we can, but we recognize that there is a need for continuous improvement. Yeah.
Are there they kept the royalty payments? How are they accounted for? Or is it a separate account? Or is it the same PEER account?
It's tracked in the PEER account.
But does not get counted towards that 62.5.
That's correct. The royalties would have to be specifically appropriated.
And that's used for?
It's in the account, and it's not used for anything until we get authority to actually spend that royalty amount. It's in the account.
It's been accruing?
Yes.
How long has it been accruing? And what's the balance on the account?
The 4.8 is the balance, and I don't believe that in the first few years of the program there were royalties. I think it's been in the more recent past.
Yeah, over half, around half, I think, has just been in the last few years since I've run the program. It's not because of anything I did; it just happened to be.
I know there's other examples, but the first one that comes to mind is the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, the stem cell group, and their conversations and grappling with issues about intellectual property and royalties to benefit, the state, the taxpayers specifically. I got to believe there's other examples to learn from across the country, or even at the federal level. What have you done to ensure best practices are being applied here when it comes to this issue? It's not easy, I grant that. But we're not the only ones trying here.
Right. Well, I think that even when you look at the DOE program, they're pretty sketchy on the costs and benefits of the program overall. And I think that does reflect the difficulty in trying to assess those costs and benefits. And then in terms of the stem cell research, that is such a large amount of money that goes into it, and there are it's geared towards specific products that have a near-term commercialization. And so unlike our program that focuses on the earlier stages, which are the less expensive phase of development, you wouldn't necessarily expect the same kinds of royalties that you would in a stem cell research program.
And again, that was just sort of one example. I'm sure there's others.
And we've done some preliminary research on that stem cell research program, and it's difficult so far to find how they have any plan at all to use royalties or collect royalties or involve it in future funding. It's just...
and if it's okay with you, we'll use that quote in a different hearing in a different committee when we're talking about them. Okay.
I think I just got fired.
No. That's not your job. This is your job. Given all that, given that we know it's complicated, given that we've learned since 1996, given that It's only been in recent years because there was no fruit to go after in the early years. Summarize for me again what we're doing today to improve upon the situation. In part recognizing that, this sunsets in 2012. We're talking about, 15, 16 months. So major policy changes, we're only going to get 15, 16 months of benefit for unless this program is renewed or reauthorized. So it gave me a better feeling as to how we'll be on top of this if we're going to argue for renewal or extension.
Right. We've asked the staff, and we've directed the staff to start tracking royalties better. In addition, we've had staff try to identify when an early project resulted in a product. We've tried to get them to identify that. Again, we are doing some work we have a contractor who's doing some work for us, trying to help us figure out how to better track and attribute costs and benefits to the program. So I don't know when those research results will be available. So, we're trying.
But does the question apply or not apply to all the examples we get from the Energy Commission, over the years and from time to time on, well, here's how this was a good investment and it led to this. There's plenty enough to brag about based on your reports to me. This grant went out and it led to this, and this is why we think it's successful.
Okay.
One of the questions, if we followed up on every single one of those, is, okay, where's the royalty answer?
And the royalty would actually be based on what phase and the amount of money that Peer invested in it. And so if Peer made a very small investment and then the firm went forward, did additional research and development on its own and brought the product to market, we would only be entitled to a very small share of that because of our proportional investment.
But large or small, I think the big question is, are we pursuing it and are we collecting on it?
We have a team for each contract. We have a team of staff, our contract manager, contracts office, and legal officer who sits on there and evaluates whether or not these individual projects will lead to intellectual property rights and should lead to royalties. So those are assessed on a case-by-case basis. As I mentioned, in a lot of cases, we want to get information or tools out into the public to be used by the public and used by Energy Commission and other agencies, and those don't necessarily lead to, and probably do not lead to royalties. And
may I offer some insight, Senator? My experience has been in the private sector with regard to royalties applied to R&D. I can tell you during my time at the Electric Power Research Institute, and certainly I was in a unique position because I actually delved down into the files looking for this information as we attempted to create a for-profit subsidiary at EPRI. There's not a whole lot of royalties that seem to come out of R&D. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't pursue that more aggressively, and perhaps we should. It may not be a best use of the resources that we've got in terms of the legal staff and et cetera. And so I guess what I'm suggesting is that success may be measured better in terms of the companies that we've started and the amount of investment that they've attracted. We've had situations when I was at EPRI where we would pursue the royalty issue and literally strangle a company in terms of having their profits or abilities being able to reinvest in that company and grow it.
Let me do this. Let me make a comment, give you something to noodle on while I take a 3-minute break. I have to run up to the GO committee and cast a vote, and then I'll be back down. Hey, Mark. But as part of numerous conversations, we've been hearing from the Energy Commission an increasing emphasis in recent years, and as time goes on research that will bring products to market. So we're talking about that commercialization hurdle that you've been referencing, not the early stages of research. It would seem to me that if we're talking about an increased focus on the commercialization area of our investment, that the intellectual property and royalties issue is even more important. So when I come back, let's let me get the answer again in the context of that as the new area of emphasis and what we've been doing, how we've been improving, and what we still need to do. Okay, so we've got a couple minutes to noodle that. I'll be right back.